Good morning. We begin today's daf. Today's daf is Bava Basra, Daf Yud Beis 12a in Bava Basra. We are beginning today's daf by thanking all our sponsors. We begin by thanking our sponsors for the month of Tammuz. A good Chodesh, first of all. We thank Daniel Batsheva Pava of Chashbonaim in Israel for sponsoring all the shiurim of the month of Tammuz in commemoration of their father, Reb Shlomo ben Yehuda Aryeh of Philadelphia on his first yahrzeit. Reb Shlomo was a child survivor of Auschwitz and a Talmud Muvak of Michal Bar Weissmandel. He left 90 plus descendants who are Yirei Shemayim. May his neshama have an aliyah, and may the family have a nechama. We thank Jeff Schwartz for sponsoring all the shiurim this week in commemoration of the first yahrzeit of his father, Shmuel ben Shimon Halevi, which was on the 29th of Sivan. We also thank Yehuda and Jenny Goodhart for sponsoring all the shiurim of the week in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Jennifer's father, Yeshaya Zalman ben Lazer. The neshama should have an aliyah, the family should have an nechama. We also thank Baruch and Bracha Rivkin for sponsoring the Daf Yomi share today for the yahrzeit of Shlomo ben Ruvain on Sunday, July 7th, which is Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. Today, the neshama should have an aliyah and the family should have continued nechama. Yesterday, we were in the middle of a discussion about a person flipping around the door from his property to the other mother. So just quickly again to describe this, for anyone who may have forgotten from yesterday, or perhaps anyone didn't understand it yesterday, we try to be clear about it again today. Generally speaking, the way that people lived in the times of the Gemara was that you had a Rishus HaRabim. So the Rishus HaRabim was a thoroughfare where everybody used to pass through. And then off of that Rishus HaRabim, they had something called Mavaos, or Mavoi, an alleyway. In other words, you made a right turn or a left turn off of the Rishus HaRabim, down this alleyway. And when you went down this alley, you would find a number of different exits off of this alleyway into a chutzner. So you had a chutzner, which was a dwelling area of all the people. They had these small little homes which surrounded the perimeter of the chutzner. The area in the middle, which was called the chutzner, the courtyard, was a shared property. Yesterday we described that each person in the chutzner was entitled to a certain amount of space for their own personal needs, which was basically for loading and unloading. And then aside from that, they shared the rest of the chutzner. That's where they went about their daily affairs. That's where they took care of most of their needs. Now, if a person happens to live at the area at the end of this alleyway, so much so that the back of his property backs up to the mavoi of the next mavoi. In other words, you have the Rishus HaRabim on one side, and then you have a Rishus HaRabim on the other side. You have these two different mavois that are going to meet in the back. This person lives in the back. He wants to switch his door from facing, let's just say, mavoi A, which is to my right, to face mavoi B, which was behind him, and now it's going to be in front of him. So let's now learn the Gemara at the bottom of Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis, 5 lines from the bottom. Amar Mar, Haya Sasam Ubikesh Leposko, Ein B'nei Mavoi Ma'akvin Olav. We said yesterday that if a person from one Mavoi wants to open up a door into the other Mavoi, the people of that Mavoi can say, "Sir, I'm sorry, you can't open your door here. You're not a resident of this particular Mavoi. You can't start using our Mavoi. You're going to increase foot traffic here, and we're not interested in that, and therefore you can't do it." However, the Gemara told us that if he already had a door, but he closed it up, so he locked up the door, he has not been using that door for a long time, so then it's a door. He's allowed to just open it, and the people from the other mavoi, from the other alleyway, cannot stop him from doing that, because just the fact that he hasn't used this door in a long time doesn't mean he forfeited his rights to ever use that mavoi again, and therefore he's allowed to open it. Now Rava qualifies this. He says, Amar Rava, Lo shanu elosh lo paratz es patzima. That's only true if he didn't actually destroy the doorposts. Aval paratz es patzima. In other words, he completely dismantled the door. He took out the doorposts, he took out the mezuzos and the mashkof, and he paneled it up. He put some framing in there, and he put some sheetrock on the inside and wood on the outside and siding, and now it's all done. He says, you know what? I'd like to open up this door again. At that point in time, we view it as building a new door. The fact that he once had a door there doesn't give him doesn't entitle him to always open up a door in a place where he had a door. In other words, if it's just a door that he closed, he can open it. Once he demolished that door, then he loses his rights. The people of the opposite mavoi can say, I'm sorry, you are not invited to go ahead and use our mavoi. Amar le Abaye le Rava. Abaye brought a riot to Rava and said, Tiny Messiah will bring a brisa that will ultimately prove what you are saying is true. And it says as follows: Bayis sasam, if a person has a home where the door is closed, then yesh lo dalet amos. Again, yesterday we explained that each home is entitled to dalet amos, to this 4 cubic amos in front of the house, to be able to load and unload. Now, if a person closed up the door, so he shut the door, put a padlock on it, and he kept it closed. The halacha is still yesh lo dalet amos. The person from that house is still entitled to his 4 amos in front of it. However, once that person not only closed up his door, but he was parat es patzima, he went ahead and destroyed the doorpost. In such a case, ein lo dalet amos, he loses his right to 4 cubic amos in front of his house, because we don't view that as a door anymore, and he has officially forfeited his rights for loading and unloading. When we skip the parentheses, we go on to explain again. Bayis sasam, another halacha. The halacha is that a kever, a place where a mace is buried, has a halacha that it's midrabanan, it's betame, 4 amos all around it. In other words, in every direction around this kever, around this grave, it's betame 4 amos. However, if there's a door, then it's only metame dalet amos in front of that door. So therefore, bayis sasam, if you have a house that has a closed door, eino metame kol sevivav. It's not metame the entire area of dalet amos around it, because the fact that the door is closed doesn't mean there's no door. It just means the door is closed. However, parat et patzimav, if you're going to take apart the entire door, you just dismantle the entire posts and the lintel, take the whole thing down, and all you have is, again, a destroyed door, and then you board the whole thing up. In such a case, we view the entire apparatus as a cave, and therefore, metame kol sevivav, like a regular caver, is going to be metame. So again, we're bringing out this point that a closed door still remains a door. However, a dismantled door has a different set of halachos. A dismantled door is a destroyed door, and we view it as if the door is not there at all. Okay. Amar Rabba bar Bar Chana. Rabba bar Bar Chana said the following in the name of Amar Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Mevos hamfulashos li'ir acheres ubikshu b'nei ha'ir l'sosman b'nei osa ha'ir ma'akvin aleim. So this is what we're referring to as a mavoi hamefulish. So what we've been describing up until now is a mavoi which is closed. In other words, we're describing the mavoi. You have the Rishus Harabim, this main thoroughfare, and then you have these alleyways that go off of this main thoroughfare into all these cul-de-sacs of homes. Now, at the end of the mavoi, there's a dead end. However, if you have a mavoi mefulish, you have this mavoi which goes from one thoroughfare to the other thoroughfare, and then people said, you know what, we don't like this anymore. There's too much traffic going on in our alleyway. So therefore, Bikshu B'nei Ha'ir, the Sosman, the people who lived there, wanted to shut it down. Halacha is, B'nei Osa Ha'ir, people who live in that city, Ma'akvin Aleim, can stop them. The Gemara explains, Lomi Boy, it's not even necessary to talk about this in the case, Kileka Darka Achrina, when there's no other route that can get them through the city, but they can't just close it up. The Ma'akvi, Elafilu Ki'ika Darka Achrina, even if there's another road that they can take, just perhaps it's a little bit out of the way, Nami Ma'akvi, the people of that city can stop them from closing down that mavoi which goes from one thoroughfare to the next. Why? Mishum Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, because of the teaching of Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, who taught us the Amar, Meitzar Shechziku Bo Rabim, Asar Lekalkalo. If you have an area on the border of a particular field, that the entire community has already established that as a pathway, that's where they travel, the halacha is you're not allowed to destroy it. Now, there's a lot to be said about this. We discussed this in Parakam Niach, I believe, in Bava Kama, and it comes up again later in this Pesach. But the basic idea is that the entire premise is we're talking about a case where the owner of this area gave them permission initially. So the people who are passing through are not trespassing. They have permission to use this as an area to pass through, which is the same thing as the Mavoi. The Mavoi was an area that everyone had permission to walk through. So essentially, there was a mechila. The people who lived there already gave them permission to be able to use that area. And once it's been established as an area that people use to pass through the city, in such a case, you can't just reverse it and say, you know what, forget it. I'm not letting you go here. It's a meitzar, shechiziku v'as harabim. And once it's become muchzak, established, that people use that area, you can't just turn it off and say, you can't come here anymore. Skipping the parentheses, Amar of Anan, Amar Shmuel. Rav Anan said in the name of Shmuel, Mavos hamafulashim, if you have these open alleyways that go from one city to the next, hamafulashim l'shus harabim, they're open to Rishus Harabim, ubikshu b'nei mavos lahamid lahem delasos. So the people of the Rishus, of those mavos, of those alleyways, wanted to build doors there. Now again, there's a lot which is discussed about these doors, but let's just say even if the doors are going to be left open at certain points in time, the halacha is the people, b'nei Rishus Harabim ma'akvin aleihem. The people of Rishus Harabim can say, no, I'm sorry, you can't build doors at the entrance to your mavoi. The Gemara explained, Savor mine, we thought, Hani mili b'tal amos. That's only within the first 4 amos of this mavoi. So remember, you have this Rishus Harabim, everyone's passing through the Rishus Harabim, that's the thoroughfare that everyone uses to travel. Then you have these alleys. So now, one alley decides, you want to build a door. We don't get, so this is not talking about a case where it's a Meitzar Shachiziku V'as Harabim. It's not that the mavoi has become a thoroughfare that people use all the time, but again, it is one of the areas that people use to go from one Rishus Harabim, from one public domain to another public domain. Now the people of that mavoi wanted to build a door. So the Gemara says they can't do it. The people of the Rishus Harabim could say, I'm sorry, you can't put up a door inside your alleyway. Now the Gemara thought initially that this just meant that within the first 4 amos of their alleyway, they can't build a door. That's what it means. Savra mine, hani milu b'dalat amos. That's only true that the people could stop them from building this door in the first 4 amos. Why would we say that? Because Reb Zera Amar of Nachman, just like Reb Zera said in the name of Nachman. What is that? The Amar of Zera Amar of Nachman. Reb Zera said in the name of Nachman, Daled Amos hasmuchos l'Rishus Harabim ki Rishus Harabim damyon. The 4 amos of a mavoi close to Rishus Harabim have a halachic definition as part of the Rishus Harabim, and therefore we understood that if the Rishus Harabim was that public domain, the Rishus Harabim extends 4 amos into the mavoi, and therefore people of the mavoi cannot build a door in those 4 amos. The Gemara says, but that's not true. V'lohi, that is an incorrect assumption. Why Hasam? What was Rabbi Nachman talking about the name of Zera? That Rav Zera talking about the name of Rav Nachman, that was with regard to Tumah. We'll explain this in just a second. Hasam l'inin Tumah. Aval hacha zimnin d'dachki b'nei Rishus Harabim v'ayli tuva. Sometimes Rishus Harabim gets very crowded, and people need to have a place just offset the crowd to. So what's this din of Tumah? Halacha is that a safek Tumah b'Rishus Harabim is tahar. If you ever have a doubt as to whether or not something is Tameh or Tahar, this is an interesting halacha. It depends where it is located. If it's located in Rishus HaYachid, we say a Safek Tumah is Tameh. So if it's in a private domain, a Safek Tumah remains Tameh. If it's in a public domain, then the halacha is a Safek Tumah is Tahar. Where does this come from? So this actually comes from the halacha of Sota. By a Sota, it says, V'hi nitma'a. She became Tameya. The term which is used is Tameya. Now the halachas of Sota are only relevant if she had a kinoi, she was warned, and the nistera, and she hid away in a private place. Now since Sota, which is where this halacha comes from, she is the quintessential Safek Tumah, we don't know what happened when she was in private domain. Halacha is, when she's in a private domain, the Safek Tumah makes her Tameya. However, if she was not in a private domain, if she was in a public domain, so she was not nistera, she did not hide in a private place, then the suffix that her husband has about her activities keeps her tahora. And we apply that to all halachas of Tumah and Taira, and therefore any time you have a case of Safek Tumah in a public domain, we say it's not Tameh, and that halacha was extended not only to the legitimate Rishus HaRabim, to the public domain, but that halacha extends if you have something which you're not sure if it's Tameh or Tahar in the first 4 amos of a mavoy, of an alleyway, we also assume it's going to be Tahar because of the halacha of Safek Tumah Rishus HaRabim. Now the Gemara says that halacha with regard to Tumah and Taira has absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about over here. What we're talking about in this case is something completely unrelated. We're talking about the social norms, the community understanding of how properties are used. So you have a public domain. People use the public domain for travel. Now, the mavoy, those alleyways that broke off of that public domain, of that public thoroughfare, were often used to offset some of the traffic that was happening inside the Rishus HaRabim. Now, if you're going to build a door, even 16 amos or 32 amos into your mavoy, you know what's going to happen? You're going to cause a massive bottleneck to happen sometimes in Rishus HaRabim. And therefore, we have to allow the mavos to be open sometimes to allow the traffic to offset from the Rishus HaRabim, and therefore you're not allowed to build a door anywhere within this mavoy. Getting back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah told us, V'lo asasada, ad sheyeh ba tisha kavin. Lozeh, v'tisha kavin lozeh. So yesterday we learned in the Mishnah that if one of the partners in the ownership of a field wants to compel the other one to divide it, you cannot do it. The first opinion in the Mishnah said, unless each one of those parties ends up with a large enough piece of this field where they can produce 9 kavin. And then we had another opinion in the Mishnah which said, no, not 9 full kavin, but 9 half kavin, so 4.5 kavin. The Gemara says the truth is, they're not really arguing. V'lo pligi. Mar ki asrei, umar ki asrei. They were both talking about their particular locale where they lived, and different areas have different levels of fertility within the land. Some lands are more fertile, and therefore they could produce less. They could produce more. Other lands are less fertile, and they produce less, and therefore that's why they were just giving this amount of property based on where they lived. Now, Bava, in Bava, the land was known not to be very fertile. What's the halacha? Rabbi Yosef Bei Radu Yoma. It's not dependent on how much it can produce. Rather, it's dependent on whether each person will have enough property that it will take them a day to plow it. Now, what's the explanation for this? The explanation for this is we've mentioned this a number of times in the past as well, that most people didn't own their own equipment. They would rent equipment. Not everyone had, aside from having a field, that they also have a stable where they kept all their animals. Not everyone had a bull or an ox that they're able to use to go ahead and plow. You have to go out and rent an ox. However, the daily fare for an ox was for a full day. You don't rent an ox by the hour. So therefore, if you're going to compel your partner to split the field, and he only gets enough of the field where it will take him a half a day to plow it, so then essentially you're causing him to waste it. It's very inefficient use of his money. If every time he plows, he has to rent this ox for a day, and the ox works, until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then he has to sit there and take care of it for the rest of the day because there's nothing to do. So therefore the Gemara says, in Bava, where the land is not as fertile, we don't judge it based on how much the land produces, but based on efficiency of his finances. You want the guy to be able to efficiently use his money, so you can't compel him to divide the land unless he has enough land that he can actually use this ox for a full day. Now the Gemara says, what is this? My beiradu yoma. What are we referring to? So just a little bit of background. I'm not a farmer. I'm just taking what I know here from the Gemara. So if anybody knows any better than me, you could explain this. So basically, it seems like there's 2 times that they would plow. They would plow at the time that they are seeding. Why would they do that? Because they have to loosen up the ground to make the furrows, and they would plow then. And often, not only would they plow then, but after they did the seeding, they'd plow again like this. All the seeds will be integrated into the earth. Now, there's another time that they plowed at the time of the katsira, at the time of the harvest. Now, at the time of the harvest, it was much easier to plow because it's not such a long time ago that they plowed the field for the seeding. So again, at the time of the seeding, the ground is going to be very dry, very hard. It will take much longer to go ahead and plow all those furrows. At the time of the harvest, it would go much quicker. Now, the Gemara understands that although it took much longer to plow at the time of the seeding, it wasn't double the amount of time that it took to plow at the time of the harvest. So the Gemara is going to try to figure out, how do you evaluate this day's worth of plowing? Because remember, the guy who gets this field, he gets the field for the entire year. He doesn't just get it once. So the Gemara is going to be wondering, when we're talking about renting this ox to go ahead and do the plowing for you, which season do you base it off of? Because if he's going to base it off of the time when it takes much longer, so then it will take him a full day. But then what happens when he's plowing at the time of the harvest? He'll rent the ox, and he's done in mid-afternoon. And then if you're going to base it off of the time that he needs to plow it at the time of the harvest, that takes a full day. Okay, so that takes a full day. But guess what? The time it takes him to plow at the time of the seeding will be a day and a half. So he has to, again, rent this cow for 2 days, and the second day, he's paid for a cow or an ox, which is only being used for a half a day. That's what the Gemara is going to explain. I yoma zara treyoma. If you're talking about the days of the seeding, that takes 2 days. Sorry. I yoma zara, if we're talking about days of the seeding, treyoma karva lo havi. It's not going to be 2 days for the time of the karva, which is the time of the plowing. In Iyom or karva, we're talking about the times of the regular plowing. Yom Azar lahav, it's not going to be a full day of the time of the seeding. Ibai Sema, the Gemara says Yom de karva de karvatani. Okay, it's talking about where he does it twice. So you're right that if he was just doing it once, it wouldn't match up. But if he does Yom de karva is the time of the plowing. At that point in time, he does it twice. So yes, he might be done in midday, but he'll do it again to have a much better plow, so then he'll be able to use the time efficiently. Another way to explain this is, Yom de Zara, it's talking about the days of the Zara, of the seeding. However, about Dure, it's talking about where it's a very rough terrain, and therefore it takes him much longer. And yes, he'll have to figure it out. In other words, basically the Gemara explains, it's not always going to be perfect, but we could find a way to find this measurement where the person's going to be able to divide the field and still work it out that he'll have an efficient use of the funds when he has to rent this equipment to go ahead and plow the field. Okay, Gemara says Davla. So Davla is drawing water. So if they want to split this area that has this place where they draw water, Amar of Nachman, Beit Dalu Yom. But the same idea, you have to hire people to go ahead and be water carriers to draw water for you. So if you want to hire them, people take a daily fare. So if you're going to hire people and you're going to be finished drawing the water by the time the early afternoon comes, so again, you're paying a person to stand around and twiddle his thumbs. That's not effective. So therefore, if you want to force your partner to split it with you, there has to be enough area that the workers, that the day laborers can work for a full day. Partesa, how about an orchard? Amar avur the shmol bas shlosha kavin. An orchard needs to be able to produce 3 kavin for it to be considered to be a fair split, and if it does, then you can compel your partner to split it with you. Tani nami hachi learned another brayso as follows: Ha'omer lachavero, a person tells his friend, Manas v'kerem ani mocher lecha. My share of a vineyard I'm selling you. So my share of a vineyard is an arbitrary amount. It doesn't really explain how much it is. My share. How much does he have to give him? Sumchas Omer, Sumchas says, Lo yivchos migimel kavin. He can't give the person less than the area of this orchard that would produce 3 kavin of these grapes. Rabbi Yossi said to Sumchas, Ein elu ela divrei nevios. What Sumchas is telling us is prophecy. Now, Tosfos explains, it sounds very nice that you tell somebody that what he's saying is prophecy. However, Tosfos at the first wide line, or right before the first wide line, Lo l'shabeach ka'amar, ela kolomar she'omer belotam. In other words, you're saying, when a Navi reports his nevuah, he doesn't need to explain it. He doesn't have to give any reason for it. This is the nevuah. This is what I was told. You don't like it? Too bad. This is what Kadosh Baruch Hu told me. Now, what he's saying to Sumchus is, Sumchus, you're not a Navi. And what you're saying is an arbitrary number of how much has to be given, and therefore, Ein Elu El Divrei Nevios, you're basically telling us Nevios, and therefore we're not going to rely on you. So it's a very nice way of saying, Sumchus, this number is just an arbitrary number, you just made up this number, where'd you get it from? And considering the fact that you're not a Navi, we're not going to accept it. And the Gemara is actually going to get into a whole discussion about Nevios in a few minutes as a result of this comment that he made. The Bavel Mai. What's the halach in Bavel? Again, because we know that the earth over there is not as fertile. Amarava Bar Kisna Tlas Atziasa B'nei Tresar Gufni. It's going to be 3 of these rows of 12 vines. Basically, 3 rows of 12 vines is how much he has to give if he tells him that he's splitting it or that he's selling him his share in a vineyard. Why? Kihechi derafik gavra biyomos. Like this, a person who's working there will have enough work for a full day. Amar Rabbi Avdimi Dibin Chefa miyom shachar beis hamikdash. From the times that the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, nitla nevuah min haneviyim, prophecy, nevuah was taken away from the prophets, the nitna lachachamim, and instead it was given to the wise men of the generation. Gemara immediately stops and says, hold on a second. Atu chacham lav navihu. You make it sound like there's 2 types of people. There are neviim, and then there are chachamim. Neviim perhaps are not such smart people, and then the smart people, they were not neviim. Once the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the nevuah was taken away from the neviim, given to chachamim. But hold on a second, the Gemara says, of course, neviim are chachamim also. The Gemara says, no, you misunderstood what he meant to say. Hachi kamar, af al pi shenitla min neviim, even though nevuah was taken away from neviim, and Rashi explains they may not have been the smartest people, the biggest chacham of the generation. Min chacham lo nitla, nevuah was not taken away from chacham. So Aryeh mazeh, Gemara seems to say that nevuah was not taken away from chachamim. Now the Rishonim explain this doesn't mean that there's real nevuah anymore. If you look through the Rambam describes what happens to a Navi when he receives prophecy. None of that happens anymore. However, what it means is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives a certain level of siyata d'shmaya, of divine intervention to Chachamim to help them be mechavim libo ela emes, and that's essentially a type of nevuah. And we'll see some examples of this. Amar Meimar v'chacham adaf minavi. By the way, I know we talk a lot about, I'm not a prophet. People talk about not being a prophet. Gemara says being a chacham is something which is attainable to all people, and it's actually better than being a prophet. How do we know? Shneimar, for it says in the pasuk, the Navi, and a Navi is levav chachma, has the heart of chachma. So now, when you're talking about someone and you're comparing them, mi nitla b'mi, who are you comparing to who? Havi Omer, I would say, katan nitla b'gadol. You want to say someone is as rich as somebody, or someone is as smart as somebody, or someone is as famous as somebody, you always give the as somebody as the example. It's going to be the much better one. So if a Navi is compared to a Chacham, guess what? It must be that a Chacham is a better deal than being a Navi. And the Omer kata nitla b'gadol, and therefore we see that being a Chacham is better than being a Navi. Amar Rabbi, Teda, I can prove to you that nevuah still exists. The Amar Gava Rabba Milsa, we have a concept where a good person, a chacham, will say something. Umis Amra Mishmei de Gava Rabba, and guess what? Another really smart person said exactly the same thing. Now, how could it be that 2 people will say exactly the same thing? It must be that they both received prophecy. Umis Amra Mishmei de Gava Rabba Achrina. Kava say, Amar Rava, what are you talking about? Oh my kasha. Maybe they both had the same good fortune that they thought of the same thing. Just because 2 people thought of the same thing or came up with the same idea doesn't mean that they experienced prophecy. Gemara says, El Amar Rava. What he meant to say is as follows: Teda the Amar Gavra Rabba Milsa. A big person will say something. Umis Amra, top of your base and base. It will also be said Mishmei Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef. And we'll find out that Rabbi Akiva said the same thing. Now, who can say they're as smart as Rabbi Akiva? So if you happen to say something, and you're saying, your line of thinking is exactly consistent with Rabbi Akiva, it must be that you both received prophecy. Amar Rav Ashi again, in my question, why is it such a difficult concept to understand? Dilma lahamilsa, bar mazlehu. Doesn't mean he's as smart as Rabbi Akiva in all areas. He happened to have found one thing, which was mechaven libo. His heart thought of the same idea. He had the same fortune as Rabbi Akiva to come up with the same idea. Why does that mean that there's any prophecy? El Amar of Ashi says, Teda, the Amar Gava Rabba Milsa, a smart person will say something, or a Chacham will say something, and that's not said in the name of anybody, rather, Umis Amra Halacha L'Moshe Misinai. Person will say something, and we'll see, you know what? That thing that you just said is actually Halacha L'Moshe Misinai. Now, that's certainly prophecy. All halachas that Moshe were taught in Har Sinai is definitely Nevuah. So if a person comes up with an idea which is consistent, which is exactly in line with something which was said at Sinai, that must be some element of Nevuah. Now the Gemara says, hold on, the Dilma Kasuma Baruba. Maybe it's like a blind person who just happens to find himself falling through a skylight. Doesn't mean that he knew where the skylight was. He happened to have stumbled through a skylight. The Gemara says, V'lav Tam Yoav. We're not talking about a person who's just spitting out information and it happens to be that this magnet stuck against the wall. This is a piece of information the person said. They explain what the reason is. So if a person says something, explains the reason, so yes, in such a case, if he happens to say something which is exactly consistent with Halacha L'Moshe Sinai, we can say that there's an element of Nevuah included in that line. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, B'yom shachar beis hamikdash, nitla nevuah min hanaviyim. Prophecy was taken away from Nevi'im, and guess who it was given to? It says the Gemara, v'nitna l'shotim, it was given to foolish people, or to intellectually disabled people, u'letinokos, and to children. Don't be dismissive of anybody. Gemara says, l'shotim mai. Where do we know that Nevuah was given to shotim? Maihi, the Gemara gives an example. Kihad marbar of Ashi, like the story with marbar of Ashi, Davikoi bariska de mechuza. He was standing in the marketplace, from the open marketplace of Mechuza, and Shami lahu shota. There was this person who clearly was a shota. He was somebody who didn't have all his faculties in order. And he was standing there, to Amar Reish Mesifta, the Malach b'Masla Mechasya, the new Rosh Yeshiva in Masla Mechasya. Guess what? Tavyume Chassid. The way he signs his name is Tavyumi. That's how he signs his name. So again, you can imagine this person's in the marketplace. He has no awareness of what's going on around him. He's making these random announcements, talking about the Rosh Yeshiva in Masla Mechasya. People are being dismissive of this person, and everyone's laughing at him. People are staying away from him. And guess what? Marbar Ashi says, Amar, Man Chasim Tavyume B'Rabbanan. Who is the one, which one of the Chachamim, which one of the sages signs his name as Tavyumi? Ana, guess what? It's actually me. I sign my name as Tavyume. Shma mina lididi kaima li shaita. It must be, it's my time, my opportunity to be appointed as the Rosh Yeshiva in Masla Mechasya, and therefore come, Asa. He got up, he started heading towards the yeshiva. Ada Asa, as he was heading towards the yeshiva, Imnu Rabbanan la'osfei l'Rav Achami Diftei Bereisha. The Chachamim, the board members of that particular yeshiva, got together and they decided that they are going to appoint Rav Achami Difti as Rosh Yeshiva. So now we have a problem, because this shait in the marketplace was saying that the person who signs his name as Tavyumi is going to be the Rosh Yeshiva. Who is that? The Gemara told us that that's Marbar Ashi. And now the board, the search committee, already decided that they're going to elect Rav Acha Midifti as Rosh Yeshiva. So now, Kivin the Shame, the Asa, once that search committee heard that Marbar Ashi was heading towards their community, they said, hold on, we're not ready for the inauguration yet. Let's take a step back. It's true that we decided to appoint Rav Acha Midifti, but Marbar Ashi is on the way. Let's consult with him before we actually appoint Rav Acha Midifti. Kivin Deshamed Asa Shador Zugod Rabbanon Legabe Lemluchebe. They sent a pair of Rabbanon to discuss with Marbar Ashi whether or not they made the right selection. Guess what he did? Marbar Rav Ashi, he was ikvei. He held them back. He said, you stay here with me. They don't come back with any information. So what do? Hadar Shadra Zugad Rabbanan. He sent another pair of Rabbanan. Achrina, another pair of Rabbanan. Ikve Gabe. He held those there as well. Ad Demalu Be'asara. He did this until he had 10 Rabbanan sitting with him. And Kivin Demalu Be'asara. Apparently you have to have a minion of Rabbanan. What did he do? Pasach Hu V'tana V'darish. He started teaching. He gave his very first shir in front of these 10 Rabbanan. While if he she'im poskin b'kala pachas mi'asara. You can't start a shir with less than 10 people. So therefore, Kari Rav Acha Nafshe, what happened? He gave his first official shir. So Marbar Rav Ashi gave his first official shir, and now these Rabbanan had some information to go back to report. They went back to the yeshiva and said, you wanted to know if indeed Rav Acha Midifti was the right person? The answer is no. The right person is Marbar Rav Ashi, and guess what? This all came about through the simple talk of a shota in the marketplace who said the person who signs his name is Daf Yomi is going to be the next Rosh Yeshiva, and guess what? That's what happened. Marbar Rav Ashi became the next Rosh Yeshiva. Now Rav Acha, who came this close, he already won the election. He came this close to becoming Rosh Yeshiva. He said the following: Kari Rav Acha Kari Rav Acha and Avshei Kala Marian, anybody who has something bad happen to them, lo b'meher mitivin lo, it doesn't happen very quick. The good things start happening. V'chol mitivin lo, a person who's having good things happen to them, lo b'meher marian lo, bad things don't happen to them so quickly. In other words, when it rains, it pours. Once it starts happening, once bad things start happening, he said it's very hard to turn it around. As a matter of fact, Tosas at the top of the page says, in another place he actually said, not only will it not be very quick, but it will never turn around. Okay, Tosas deals with that. Okay, so how do we know that tinokos, that children have nevuah? Tinokos, the Gemara says, Kiha, the Basra of Chista, the Yasma of the Kamfei Davua. The daughter of Chista was sitting on her father's lap. Have the Yasvi Kamei de Rava, Rami Barchama. So his father, again, we're talking about Rav Chista. So his father was having a conversation with Rava and Rami Barchama. And Amar La, he was holding his daughter on his lap, and he said to her, Man minayu bayis. Which one of these would you like to marry? Amra Lei, this young little girl, said to her father, Tavayel, I'll take both. Now, you can't marry two men at the same time. Amar Rava said, okay, I'll go second. Why did he say he wanted to go second? Because clearly the first one wasn't going to work out. Maharsha says, Chas v'shalom, he wasn't cursing Rami Bar Chama that he should die. Rather, he was just saying that he should get divorced. All right. Either way, he did not want to be the first one, and therefore he wanted to be second. Okay. Amar Rav Dimi de Ben Chaifa said, Kaidim sheyachal Adam v'yishta. Before a person eats and drinks, having breakfast, yesh lo shtei levavos. He has two hearts. There's different understandings of this, but Rashi's understanding is the person's heart is not settled. It's not clear. They don't have good clarity of the day. After a person eats and drinks, his heart is consistent and things kind of settle down. Shenemar, for it says, Ish Navov Yilaveh. The person who's Navov, he's going to have Yilaveh, two hearts. And what does Navov mean? Uksiv Nevuv Luchos. In the construction of the Mizbeach, it says you have Nevuv Luchos. You have these four boards, and then it's hollow in the middle. Mutargamidan Chalil Luchin. The hollow space between these boards. So Navov means empty. So Navov Yilavev, a person who's empty, who's not eaten breakfast yet, they are the Yilavev, they have two hearts. Amar of Huna, in other words, they're going to be a little bit confused. Amar of Huna Breid of Yeshua. Huna said the name of Yeshua. Haragil b'yayin. Not only eating breakfast, but a person who is ragil. He frequently drinks wine. Afilu libo atum kabesula. Even if his heart is so closed, like a besula who's closed, yayin mefakcho. Wine will open it up. Shnemar v'tirosh yenovev besulos. So again, with the same terminology, navov, it means we'll open up, we'll make hollow. So therefore, drinking some wine, again, with moderation, will open up a person for good things, and their heart will become open. Amar of Huna Breid Yeshua. Pshita. It's obvious that chelik bechar, the chelik pashet, yavina le achad mitzra. So just a little bit of explanation. We're talking about the division of an estate after a parent passes away and the children are inheriting it. What's the halacha? The halacha is that all the children get what's considered to be a nachla pshuta. They get their inheritance of what is the pasht, the simple amount. The bechar gets pishnayim. He gets double. So the question is, when we're dividing it, does the bechar automatically get two pieces that are adjacent to the other ones? The Gemara says yes. Pshita, it's obvious that chelik bechar, chelik pashat, the part that he's entitled to as just a simple son, and the extra share that he gets as being the bechar, yavina le'achad mitzra, you give it to him on the same border. So like this, it's practical for him to be able to use both fields at once. However, yavam mai. What's the halach with a yavam? The halach of a yavam. What's a yavam? Just very quickly, a person's brother dies. If a person dies without any children, there's a mitzvah on his brother to marry his wife, a levirate marriage. The halacha is, he actually gets an extra share in the Yerusha. So now when he gets an extra share, is he also entitled to an extra share that is adjacent to the piece that he would have normally gotten? Amar Abaya, he gets exactly the same thing. It's just like a bechar. My taima, bechar kari rachmana. The Torah calls him a bechar. Now where's the Torah call him a bechar? Rashi tells us, it says, V'haya ha-bechar. The pasuk says, V'haya ha-bechar. So in other words, the bechar is the one who performs the yibum, and therefore he gets a double share. He is exactly like any other bechar, and he gets two adjacent pieces. Rav Amar says, no. Amar kra v'haya ha-bechar. He was the bechar, and that's only with regard to him performing the yibum. Hav yasei ki bechar v'en chalukas bechar. His status is like a bechar, but does not get a chaluk like a bechar. Hahu dezavan ara a mitzvah de ben ashya. So there was this guy who was smart. He went ahead, he was buying property, and he bought an adjacent piece of property to his father's land, knowing his father was eventually going to pass away. And now comes time for the Yerusha. He wants to inherit the piece of land that's adjacent to his land that he already owns. Kika palgu, when they're going to divide up the estate, Amar le pligu li amitzroi. Give me a piece that's adjacent to the piece that I already own. Amar Rabba says, could go in that case like this, Kof and Amidas Sodom. There's no reason why the brothers should not be compliant. Why should they give him a hard time? We force them to be compliant and give him his piece of property to be adjacent to his to make his life easier. Rabbi Yosef says, hold on. I'm relay. They can say to him, Achi, my brother, Ma'alina lei ilu debar Marian. Maybe that piece of property actually is of higher value. In other words, you're right. If there's no reason why the brothers would care about which piece of property it is, sure, give him a piece of property that's adjacent to his. Maybe that piece of property is worth more. So therefore, the halachas like Rabbi Yosef, you can't force the brothers to give them that piece of property if it's going to bring a loss to them. Trey arasa, two pieces of land, a trey nagri. Both of them they have like a river flowing through, a stream flowing through it. So Rabbi could go in such a case, again, we're going to force the brothers to give the piece to that brother who has a field adjacent to it, because what's the difference? Exactly the same. It's Rabbi Yosef. Just because they both have a stream doesn't mean they're always going to be the same. Sometimes streams dry up, and therefore it would make much more sense to go through the fields, give half of each one to each brother. Like this, they both stand a chance of always having water. The Rabbi Yosef, we pass from Rabbi Yosef that you have to make sure that it's fair, and you don't just get it because they look the same now. Next one, Trey Arasa, Achad Nigra. If you have two lands with one stream going through it, Rabbi Yosef could go in such a case, everybody agrees that you could force him to take the one that you could force the brothers to give him the field which is closer to his, because it's just the same stream. So why should he have his? Let's just say his is on the top, and you have another one under it, and then you have a stream, and then you have another field underneath. Why would you force this brother to have his field at the top, another field at the bottom, and not get the one next to it? They're exactly the same. They're both relying on the same stream. If it dries up, it dries up for both of them. In such a case, you should get the field as close to his. Maskefla abaya matzi amar beina da afishe arise. the other brother could say, you know what, I'd rather you have your field on the top and your field on the bottom, because you always have workers there, and guess what? My field is going to be protected because your workers are there. You can't, that's not a valid taina. You can't say that I want the field in the middle so I can rely on your workers to protect security. That's not valid. One more case. If you have Chad Gisa Nagra, the Chad Gisa Nahara, so if you look at the picture in Rashi over here, you have a river on one side, and Nagra, the stream, that's going to go off of it on the other side. So therefore, there's really no fair way to divide this, because if you go any way up or down, one person gets the whole stream, and one person gets the whole river. But it can't be fair. So therefore, Palgina le Bekarna Zol, you're going to divide this in a diagonal way. So according to Rashi, if you look at Rashi, it kind of looks like a pie of pizza over here, which is very strange. In other words, you take the field and you're going to cut it into 8 different slices. And then you see the Reish and Shin, Reuven, you divide it in this very strange way. Where Reuven gets a piece, Shimon gets a piece, Reuven, Shimon, and therefore they get exactly the same type. In other words, they both get one field which is adjacent to the river. They both get one field which is adjacent to the stream. They both get a field which is adjacent to nothing. Like this, it's fair. Now, Tosfos, among other Rishonim, say this is ridiculous. Who wants to have a field like this? How could you have a field like this? It's just unusable. And therefore, they explain this very differently. They say see the picture in Tosfos, you have the river on one side and the stream on the other side, so you just make one diagonal cut, like this, they'll both get part of the river and part of the stream, and the rest of it is one field, and it's actually efficient to be used. You're not going to have to plow your field like a pie of pizza. We'll stop here. Have a wonderful day, a good Chodesh, and a wonderful week.